Hello and welcome to Leeroy Gaming, where today I'm providing you another special Outriders video. In this video, I'm going to help you quickly and easily get from level 1 all the way through CT15 on the Technomancer. Now, if you've seen my last video, it focused on getting through the process with the most popular build out, which is going to focus on weapon damage, the blighted rounds buff, and assault rifles most likely. So if you're looking for that video, you're going to see it popping up above. Now, in today's video, we're going to focus on the polar opposite, which is the Anomaly build. It's going to build quite a bit differently. It is the most demanding when it comes to gear selection. Do note that. It is a perfect primer for getting you ready for my special video that I have posted on my MAD Alchemist build. That should be popping up above and also linked below. So if you want to get from level 1 into that build, this is the video for you. We're going to break this video into five very specific parts: campaign levels 1 to 27, post-campaign 27 to 30, CT1 to CT10, the beginning of expeditions, CT11 and to CT13, which is the grind, and finally CT14 and CT15. Do take advantage of the timestamps below. Again, if you enjoy this content, make sure to help out the channel, keep it simple, and drop a like. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and get into the guide. Okay, now when it comes to leveling from level 1 to 27, we're going to be going through the main campaign. And there's only a couple key things that you need to know. First of all, the key to getting through the campaign quickly is you want to get through the main campaign, ignore all of the side content if you're trying to go as fast as possible. The main campaign missions give you massive EXP. All the side content has way smaller levels of EXP. So we're going to, for now, ignore all the side content and go all the way to the end of the game. By following that format, you're going to get to around level 27, 26 or 27 by the time you're done. Now, in order to do this efficiently, we want to look at your world tiers. You want to go at the very beginning of the game. You're going to be a world tier 1. We're going to want to stay at world tier 1. If you want to be as efficient as possible, you can, at the bottom here on the computer, it's pressing C, or maybe different on a console, and you want to basically set it so that auto set highest available tier is off, because you do not get more quest EXP for doing higher difficulties. Now, you can up it to whatever level you want, but it's just going to be slower. Remember, all gear you're going to get as you level is going to be obsolete, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Keep it low, at max maybe 2 or 3. Okay, now, while playing the main campaign, again, levels 1 to 27 roughly, when it comes to our skills, you're going to want to get used to using your cryo turret. You're going to be using that throughout your entire game. Outside of that, because this is going to be kind of a fast clear, should only take a couple hours since we're doing World Tier 1, you can kind of pick and choose what you want to use. If you want, feel free to use blighted rounds temporarily, or this is not a bad time to just experiment and fun with some of the other abilities. End game, we're going to be using Cold Snap, as well as Blighted Turret, but those are not available till level 17 and level 22 respectively. So until then, play around with whatever you want. To be honest, you could finish the main campaign at lower difficulty without using a single ability. So have some fun with it, and don't worry about too much what you want to pick. Now, again, if you want a recommendation from me, Blighted Rounds, can't go wrong with it. If you want a little extra heal, fixing wave is not bad. And kind of like a pretty fun kind of little burst damage early on would be either Scrapnel or Pain Launcher. Try them both out. They feel a little different the way they play and you place them. Obviously, Pain Launcher is a very long cooldown, so this is more like if you have a little boss or an elite enemy that you're fighting, can drop it down. Again, this is kind of for flavor. You're not going to maintain it long term, but it's going to help you out in the short term. Now, when it comes to your skill tree from level 1 to 27, what you see right here is all you need, but it is mandatory, and I'll tell you why. So even though we're going to be actually building a tech shaman-like build with a little bit of hybrid work, building down the trees, for now, what we care about is going up here, picking up suction mode, just a little extra survivability, but we want Sniper Master. Now, the reason this is important is that as you level up, you want to be getting more sniper rifles and really marksman and bolt action rifles. This build, the MAD Alchemist build in particular, is going to be based on having a very specific, unique sniper rifle category item. And your primary weapon, which is going to be a custom epic piece of loot you're going to find, is also going to be in this category. So the more chances of these dropping, the more likely you are to get that legendary, even if the chance is really low. You know, Iron Jesus is going to come in and either help you out or not. You can't control that. So this can only help you. Now, while you're leveling, you may or may not use sniper rifles. You may even use assault rifles. We'll talk about in just a second. But you want this as you level up. Outside of that, nothing else is required. You can build however you want. If you're using a strategy, I recommended to use World Tier 1, 2, or 3. Doesn't matter what you pick. Feel free and do a traditional Pestilence build straight across here if you want. Come on down here. Again, it does not matter. You cannot go wrong as long as you have Sniper Master. Okay, now let's talk about weapon and armor strategies for level 1 to 27, the campaign. Golden rule here, during these levels, you're going to be leveling up so fast that I would just recommend keeping it simple. Pick up the highest item level gear that you have. Item level is going to scale your health. It's going to scale your mod damages for anything that has a damage modifier on it. And it's going to give you also just more anomaly damage as you level up. So in early levels, you can quite literally wear whatever you want. When it comes to other elements you can factor in is looking at the mods, the low-level Tier 1 mods, Tier 2 mods that look interesting, that you want to try out, or they're just on it that can benefit you nice and easy. That is perfectly fine. But again, every couple minutes, you're going to be replacing loot. So don't worry about it too much. This process is going to go extremely quickly. When it comes to weapons, you can go one of two ways. Either start getting ready, getting used to the type of weapons you're going to use in the end game here. So if you're following my MAD Alchemist build guide, again, check out the link for that above. You're going to be using a rifle one-shot variant as your backup weapon, and you're going to be using the same type of weapon for your primary. So it is a different play style. So you can either start getting used to it now, or if you just want to be really fast with it, because you're not going to be min-maxing these rifles until you get the proper mods, just feel free to get an assault rifle tactical variant or a submachine gun tactical variant. They both feel really, really good and really nice and easy. I recommend when you're leveling up, you can get like weapon leech on it, weapon life leech. That's just going to help you survive even easier. Nothing else is going to be really mandatory. If you get lucky and you get like Perpetuum Mobile, as you see here in this mod, or you get Bone Shrapnel as you level up, those are both really, really good mods to have on your weapons. And if you're getting close to 27, if you get a weapon with one of these, definitely hold on to it, because it's going to help you in that initial grind while you're waiting to get your build up and running. As mentioned, the anomaly-based builds are very, very gear dependent at high level. So for now, we just want to go quick and easy. So those are your options with gear from level 1 to 27 during a campaign. Now let's take a look at mod selection during level 1 through 27 during a campaign. There's not really much that is mandatory. You may want to take a look at the mod that you see here on this piece of loot. The mod is called Hail Shot. This, believe it or not, is going to make your cryo turret end game be doing millions and millions and millions of damage. So increasing the turret's damage based on your status power. Early on, because you're not going to be min-maxing gear early on, this isn't going to be as big of a deal, but it is a mod that you want to keep an eye out for, and I start using it rather quickly. I found that you may even accidentally find gear that has status power on it, and this is going to help up that DPS. Since it is a ranged turret that has like perfect accuracy, this is very, very useful. Otherwise, as you kind of get into the higher levels, closer to 27, you're going to start finding some tier 2 mods that are kind of interesting. So as seen on this piece of armor here, there are, or rather here, you're going to find emergency state stance is never bad. So attain golem protective effect for 4 seconds whenever your health drops below 30%. That's a good kind of emergency defense. Also, ice trap is quite good. whenever your health drops below 30%. Freeze is afflicted on enemies within 10-meter radius. These are just nice defensive mods. I also like Radical Therapy, deal 15% more damage against enemies afflicted by Toxic. Now, this is if you're going to be using the Blighted Rounds as you level up as an alternative. And then once you hit level 22, you're going to be using the special Blighted Turret, and that's going to apply toxic damage as well in the end game. So that's a good one to have. I like Stand Tall, another nice and easy one to get because it's pretty much automatic. You're not going to be in cover much, so it's automatic Anomaly and Firepower damage that gets stacked. Also, for this build in particular, if you get lucky and find Untamed Power on a piece of loot that has decent stats, it's a good one to start testing out. And if you get min-max stats, so kind of give you a little hint for the future, if you get stats like this, Anomaly Power, cooldown reduction, and status power, hold on to it. It may very well be worth it to level up. I have found that it's rare to get Untamed Power, maybe just my RNG luck, but this is a key part to the build, and you don't want to have to roll this mod. You never want to have to roll a mod onto a tier 2 mod onto a piece of gear. You only want to roll tier 3 ones in the future. So look out for that mod. It may seem insignificant initially, but once you get really high Anomaly power levels, this is going to be huge. And then the other one I really like, that's a combination of defense and offense and is going to stay on all the time for you, is Rejuvenation. You get Firepower, Anomaly Power, and Armor. It lasts for every 10 out of 10 seconds. It will constantly be up because you get health back anytime you do any damage. Your turret or you, it's just going to be 24/7. So those are some nice and easy mods for early game that you can keep an eye out. Otherwise, because the game is so easy, just kind of go with the flow. Everything again is going to get replaced rather quickly. Okay, next we're going to have post-campaign, which is probably going to be roughly level 27 to level 30. Now, you could jump right into expeditions, but instead I recommend the following strategy. This is the time that you're going to go back, and we're going to go to each section that you went through the game, and you're going to want to complete the Wanted quests, the Hunter quests, and then you're going to have the Historian quests. Now, you can see these little markers on the map. So the Wanted quests, which are the humanoid targets, are going to look like a little sniper icon. You're going to have the Historian quests, which are the little book, and that's where you go to a little side area and you find an item to turn in. And then you're going to have the monster hunts, and those are the hunter missions. Now, there are 10 of them split across the map. They're very easy to access. Whenever you complete all 10 of each of them, in addition to the EXP and the gear options, you're going to also get one legendary from guaranteed legendary from the end of this. Now, at this point, if you want, you can turn on your world tiers and do at least world tier 3 just to get better gear now. Depending how comfortable you are, you can accelerate your progress into early CT expeditions, low-level CT expeditions, by pushing yourself a little bit. But the main goal here is to get some free legendaries. They're going to be really rare early game, and any source of guaranteed legendaries is key. Now, these weapons you may not necessarily keep in the long term, but it's going to be a source of tier 3 mods that are very, very powerful. And there's no better time to do this than now, because by the time you get into mid and late expeditions, all this gear is going to be outdated anyway. You're not going to want to go back. It's going to be a waste. So if you do all of these, it's rather quickly, because you can just literally travel to each section, teleport to the areas where you see the quest icons, pick up the quests, do them. It's going to take you maybe 1 to 3 hours to complete all 30 of them, maybe a little longer depending on your playstyle. You'll have a minimum of 3 legendaries, and you should be at level 30 easily, which is going to help you transition to the next area. Okay, now when it comes to skills for the post-campaign content, level 27 to 30, we're going to implement the skills that you're going to be using in endgame. So you're going to be now using Blighted Turret, you're going to be using Cold Snap, and you're going to be using Cryo Turret. And you very likely may have already been using this as early as level 22, and that's when you finally unlocked Blighted Turret. This is going to be what you use from now until the end of time. Get used to the synergy of constantly replacing blighted turret. Notice here I have a bunch of debuffs, so it's 5.6 second cooldown. You'll likely have about a 7.7 second cooldown or so, but that's still super fast. Note that cryo turret is slower. It's almost 18 seconds, but because it's ranged, you're not going to have to place it down as often. And of course, cold snap is another one. I have the cooldown down to 20 seconds. It's going to be closer to 30 seconds when you get it, which is perfectly fine. This is, again, going to be your kind of oh shit button, so get used to using it. Now, when it comes to skill trees, we are going to transition you to the skill tree that you're going to use until after you find your min-maxed weapons. So this is the second to last format that you're going to use. And it's different than probably anything you've ever seen. Notice we go up here first. We're going to pick up suction mode because, again, that extra 5% weapon leech, it's not bad. You could go Sour of Decay, but the cooldown on your Decay turret is so low that it really doesn't matter. So you're going to go up instead. Again, as before, we want to keep the Sniper Master up because that extra 20% chance of a sniper type weapon dropping then has, higher chance statistically to get a legendary that's of this type, or an epic quality or a rare quality that has the right stats rolled. So when we talk about rolling the right type of gear, this is just going to help you out. And also, the other little notes here aren't bad. So because we're not using blighted rounds, you're not going to have instant armor piercing with your main gun. So having armor piercing is great. Critical damage is great. And of course, we're going to be min-maxing vulnerability right off the bat. Going to get that full, I believe it's 27% when it's buffed. So this is the way you want to build. And by max level, you're going to have the full build out here, as you can see here. Very, very straightforward. Now let's talk about gear for level 27 to 30 and then moving forward. So this is the first time where leveling slows down just a little bit because you no longer have those massive XP dumps from the main story quests. So you can start to look at your gear a little bit more carefully. It's going to last you more than 5 to 10 minutes now. So we can take a look at kind of the main stats you're going to be looking for on gear. So as the gears drops, there's going to be a couple consistent elements you want to look into. Every piece of min-max gear you're going to be aiming for in the future is going to have anomaly power. So that's the first thing you want to look for when you're looking for gear. And then the other stats you care about are going to be as follows. You're going to want status power as much as possible. This is going to increase the likelihood of your dots, your toxic damage, your freezing damage to stay up longer on enemies. Also impacts damage with similar abilities. You're also going to want to get some cooldown reduction and some skill life leech. Now, there's a balance here because your long cooldowns, like your cryo turret and then your cryo freeze ability, both of those have really long cooldowns. So in the long run, getting that as low as possible is going to help out. But you also need to survive based off your skill life leech. That's going to be about 90% of your healing. So if you want to be aggressive, you can aim for 3 pieces of skill life leech. That's how I have currently. And then 2 pieces that are going to have the cooldown reduction. If you find it that you're not having enough sustain from healing, then you can potentially get 4 pieces of gear that's going to have the skill life leech and 1 with cooldown. That's what you're kind of aiming for. So anytime as you level up that you have gear that has anomaly, cooldown, and skill life leech, anomaly, skill life leech, and status power, any of these combinations that we're talking about, those are fine for now to pick them up. When it comes to weapons, you are now going to want to more and more keep an eye out for rifles, and in particular one-shot variants. But remember, we can go and change the firing mode on these weapons. So I personally do not like scoped variants because we are going to be kind of aiming down sights, but also being very mobile. A lot of times you're going to be in close range. And so the scope really disorientates me. So what I look for in particular, and your taste may vary, you may be fine with a scope, but I look at rifles like this that clearly do not have a scope. And again, Molten Aidola does not have a scope, so you'll be getting used to that eventually as well. So that's what you're looking for. Now, for your custom rifle, the stats that are the most important are skill, life leech, and status power, because those are the two stats that are going to impact your actual playstyle. Armor piercing is a nice bonus, but at these levels, this is all just kind of icing on the cake. Mainly just look for highest level possible rifles if you can. And then at this point, technically, because you're not min-maxed with your mods yet, you can still use assault rifles. You can still use submachine guns. And if you use those, again, follow similar rules for stat allocation. Weapon life leech isn't bad, but again, in this build, your weapon damage is going to be much, much lower overall. So this isn't quite as important. Now, during level 27 to 30, when it comes to mod strategies, this is still relatively early game in the full scoop of things. So you don't have to be too particular with mods, but you can reference the mod kind of recommendations that I covered in the level 1 to 27 section. So make sure you use the timestamp for that. Nothing has really changed. You're still not going to be getting access to the tier 3 mods too readily. For the most part, it's getting lucky with the tier 2 rolls, and then pick and choose whatever seems kind of fun. There's a variety of turret affecting mods that are perfectly fine. None of them are necessary for this portion. So again, don't think about it too much. Don't waste time. Just get the gear of the best possible kind of stat allocation and move on. Okay, now that you're level 30, we're going to be transitioning to the world of expeditions, which you're going to spend most of your time on. Now, this is the camp. This is your Outrider camp. Get used to it, because after every expedition, it's going to dump you here. So even though you're going to notice that in a lot of part of my video, I'm in Trench Town, because that's where you're going to go when you cycle check your gear moving forward. Unfortunately, as soon as you do an expedition, even from Trench Town, it's going to dump you right back here. Now, when we talk about expeditions, if you're near to them, let me explain a really quick concept to it. This is a whole new system of difficulty that is completely different from world tiers. So, as I mentioned, you're going to complete the game on world tier 1. You can increase it if you want, but what level you are on world tier has no bearing on expeditions. So here you're going to start with tier 1, and you'll notice it says enemies and loot levels level 31. As soon as you beat an expedition within a time limit, in this example here, the silver is 949. It's going to differ. As soon as you beat in silver or in gold, it's going to unlock one or more tiers that you can access. And as you can see, what happens is, as you increase tiers, the main thing that you want to focus on is the enemies and loot level. So it starts with level 31, and then it's going to go all the way to enemies and loot level 50 at tier 15. Now, the loot increases here as well, but don't worry about this as much right now. It's not going to be a real thing that you focus on too much until you're, CT10 plus, challenge tier 10 plus. For now, what matters is what you can handle as far as difficulty. Now, as you get above level 30, you're going to notice for every level that you increase, the difficulty of the mobs actually has a pretty big jump. It's not linear. Same with your gear. So you get gear that's level 30, and you get your next piece of gear that's 31, 32, and so forth. The damage numbers are going to go up quite a bit. The stat numbers are going to go up quite a bit. So being behind by 1, 2, or 3 levels, or gosh forbid, more than that, then the content you have is going to destroy you. So unlike other games or MMOs where you're used to, okay, it's fine, this piece of loot is 2 levels lower than me, not a big deal. Here it starts to become a bigger deal. So if you're struggling, look at the enemy levels and how close is that to your average gear level. Now, if you're wondering what your average gear level is, let me show you that really quick. If you go into here and on PC, you're going to hit Shift for stats. It'll say right here, average item level. And so this is going to impact max health and max anomaly as well. So this can give you kind of an idea of, relatively speaking, if you're in the vicinity of the gear levels that you should be for the content. So again, as we go from CT1 to CT10, that's what you're going to want to factor in. Picking the difficulty level based on how you are doing with gear and how you feel. Don't worry about it. The reward increases yet. It's about naturally and effectively progressing and completing those runs, so you just get the mass amount of loot at the end of the expedition. Now, during Challenge Tier 1 to Challenge Tier 10 range, you're going to continue on with the same skills as you did in level 27 to level 30. So again, Blighted Turret, Cold Snap, Cryo Turret doesn't change, and also we are not changing anything on your build yet when it comes to your skill tree. Again, we still need that Sniper Master so that you are getting those rifles dropping as much as you can. So none of this is going to change. Okay, next let's take a look at strategies for gearing. So armor pieces and weapon pieces. Now, when it comes to challenge tiers 1 through 10, you're going to be getting loot in one of three ways. At the end of the expeditions, you're going to get a bunch of loot from the chest. Next, what you're going to be doing, taking that loot and checking it out, and then putting into one or two categories. If a piece of loot is useless for you, and it's of epic quality, you are going to always disassemble it. It's very, very important because if you were to sell it, it's worth less than if you were to break it down. You're going to get more titanium, which is going to be important for crafting when you break it down. Also, as a bottom line note, if you get a piece of gear that you're going to get rid of, where you have a mod that you have not received, meaning if you look here, both of these mods have the little squared boxes next to the name of the mod. If you don't have that yet, it means you haven't kind of memorized it. So you want to, by default, disassemble that piece of loot, whether it's epic or the rare quality, which is the blue quality. So if you don't have one of the variables and you're getting rid of something, always that first time get rid of it. Epic will always get disassembled. Now blues, you're gonna, if you don't need the mods on them, you're gonna sell them, because during this CT1 to 10, you need scraps. You're gonna be using scraps for putting mods on gear, and also for some light potential crafting, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So that's how you're gonna deal with the gear from expeditions. Now, with those resources, you're gonna be utilizing scrap to get gear and additional chance at gear through the merchant system. So let's take a look at that. Now in your main camp here, the Outrider camp, you only have two different merchants that you're gonna have access to for getting gear. You're gonna have Bailey, and for Bailey, you're gonna have gear that you can buy loot with scraps exclusively. Now Tiago is here. He is an endgame merchant, and he uses drop pods. Now drop pods are gonna be used to buy some of your first legendary gear. The type of legendary gear you can buy is preset, so let me kind of show you. For me, I've already bought a lot of the ones I wanted, but you'll start with about, I believe it's 8 or 9 elite offers. As far as I know, this hasn't changed since the game release. It may or may not change. You can look ahead and see if any of the pieces of gear interest you. Now, do note, if you look at the cost here, this scales with your CT level, so don't get scared off. I'm level 50, so this would cost 85,000 drop pods. When you're CT1 and you're getting like 6 or 8 drop pods, you're going to be like, oh my goodness, how am I going to afford this? Don't worry. When you first see this, it's going to be much lower, maybe be 1,000 or something, or less than that. It's going to scale relatively. As you clear higher challenge tiers, you're going to get more and more drop pods. So for example, I believe it's about 74,000 drop pods you get for one completion of a challenge tier 15 gold medal completion. So it's going to be all relative as you level up. Now, do not waste your money on these epic pieces of loot that cost drop pods. They're early game. It's a total waste. You're going to be using your drop pods in a different way, and I'll explain that in just a second. So this is a trap. Now, and for our build, I'm going to show you right now the pieces of loot that you are going to actually target with your drop pods, and you're going to want to get them as soon as possible, because again, the earlier you get them, the cheaper they're going to be, and they're going to be a big impact on your loot. I'll mention that in just a second. Now, outside of these two, there's actually a couple more vendors you can have access to. So right now, I'm going to go to Trench Town and show you how you're going to be kind of min-maxing your ability to get good loot, starting with Challenge Tier 1, moving toward Challenge Tier 10. The closer you get to Challenge Tier 10, the more and more you're going to want to use this format. Okay, now I'm going to tell you the advanced strategy for maximizing the chance of you getting perfect God rolls on your loot. Now, you can start doing this strategy as early as you want. Realistically, you're going to start doing this more and more towards the end of your CT1 to CT10 experience. I think I started using this strategy around CT8, CT9 when things started getting kind of tough. But if you want to go through the extra effort, then you can start doing this right away. The reason I say extra effort is that you're going to have to manually travel here anytime you want to do this. Unfortunately, even if I were to go right here and do an expedition, it's not going to dump me back here afterwards. It's going to take me back to the desert camp. So when you come here, though, you're going to have 4 opportunities for looking for loot. And this is going to be kind of like, you know, RNG search. Now, there's going to be Bailey. She's right here. Across the way is Tiago. But then, of course, inconveniently, you're going to have 2 other NPCs. So over here, you're going to have Rough Pablo. Let's take a look at Rough Pablo. Now, just like the other 2 vendors, they're all going to have regular loot that's going to change every 30 minutes. So theoretically, you could come here every 30 minutes and check out his new offers. Now, he will always have nothing but armor here. So 3 leg pieces, 3 chests, 3 gloves, 3 helmets, 3 boots, and a selection of 1 item on sale and 4 elite offers. So as you're going to be searching for those perfect stats, in addition to whatever you get from your drops, you can come here and check these out. If they happen to have all 3 stats, awesome. Pick up the blues automatically. If they're epic, it's very important that not only do they need to have the best stats that we discussed earlier in this video, but you also need to make sure that when it comes to the mods that are here, at least one of them is going to match the mods that you're going to start seeking when it comes to CT1 to CT10 and above. And in a moment, when we get to the mods section, we'll talk about that. So just note that you can check and find additional armor options here. And again, for endgame, you're going to be here all the time. For now, just note that it is an option. And in addition to this, there's going to be one more vendor. So if you turn around, it can be a little disorientating at first, but if you go straight back across the camp and up this little hill here, you're going to find one more vendor. And this is the weapon vendor. It's Eric Rib. What a name. So he's going to offer blue weapons, 1 on-sale weapon, and then 4 elite offers. So this is when you're trying to look at those rifles. For example, here is a one-shot variant rifle. That's great. As I mentioned before, I am not a fan of the ones with the scope. I don't like the scope interface when you are going to be shooting in closer range, which will happen with this build, in addition to long range, but maybe you're okay with it. In the end game, all that matters is that you're going to have a one-shot variant of a rifle. Again, I chose to go with the scope. Your mileage may vary, but just note that this is where you're going to want to check for those items. Again, if you're going to be looking at weapons that are going to be epic variety, you need to make sure that one of the mods is going to be one of the 2 mods that you're going to min-max the game with. And again, for reference, let me show you. For your custom rifle, Mark of the Stake is what I recommend for this particular build. You are not going to be able to have it roll with a tier 3 mod, so Mark of the Stake is what you need on there if it's going to be epic, unless you do a variable of this build, which is perfectly fine. But just note, you do not want to have a weapon where both the mods are junk, because you're only going to ever be able to reroll one. Now, I want to provide you with an additional tip when it comes to finding the right rifle. As I mentioned, in endgame, you're going to be using the one-shot variant. Now, the main thing here is that's going to become useful once you start getting the mods that work off of reloads. So I want to show you how you can change any rifle that is applicable to swap over to that shooting mode. Now, very important, legendary weapons, you cannot change the fire modes. That's why there's only one-shot variant rifle that's legendary. It happens that it's very good for our build. We got lucky on that. But for example, here, the rifles, if you go into crafting and select swap variant, you might find standard rifles that have 8 bullets in a clip. You don't want that. So you can go here and for almost no resources swap over. Now notice there's only one clip size. Your base damage goes dramatically higher. So like in this case, it's level 50, but 31,000 versus 12, it's almost 3 times more base damage. Now, again, if you didn't know why we want the one-shot variant, it's because every single mod we have is going to be based on reloading. So notice here, Mark of the Stake. Reloading weapon inflicts burn on enemies previously wounded by this weapon without changing it. So once you start shooting things and reloading after every single shot, anything that you had previously shot that's still alive, it's going to refresh that burn. Very, very powerful. And then the ultimate mod you're going to be looking for is going to be Scrap Grenade. Notice here, the first shot after reloading becomes an Anomaly projectile, dealing 226,000 damage in 5-meter radius. It's a 1-second cooldown. Now, the damage scales with your item level. So it doesn't matter what your firepower is. It doesn't matter what your anomaly power is. This is only going to scale with item level, but it's going to be the majority of your damage when you play this game and this build from your weapon. So this is going to be key. And obviously, having something that auto-reloads is much easier. If you have a weapon that has multiple clips, you would have to manually reload after every shot to min-max this. Hence why you have the one-shot variable. And then again, for reference, if you're curious, your legendary weapon is going to stack 2 different weapons that have very long cooldowns. So, and of course, the rifle is a one-shot variant by default. So you might as well get used to that one-shot playstyle. All right. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the recommended mods during CT1 to CT10 for armor. Now, again, this is for an anomaly build, so this is going to be quite a bit different in some cases on the type of mods you might find interesting and required versus a traditional firepower mod, because you're not going to be looking for anything that's predominantly firepower. So the strategy can be quite a bit different. So let's take a look at some of the mods I really like. Starting with the gear I have. Again, we're going to emphasize Tier 2 mods at this point. Tier 3 mods are going to be a luxury because legendaries are going to be relatively rare for now. So if you want to see my recommendation for the Tier 3 mods, check out the section when we're farming CT11 to 13 later in the video via timestamp. I will cover that. But as far as Tier 2 mods, let's start with Tier 1. Hail Shot. This is mandatory for this build to maximize your damage. Again, one of your top 3 damage sources will be your cryo turret because we're stacking so much status power. So Hail Shot, increased turret's damage based on your status power. It's a Tier 1. You need to have it naturally rolling. You do not want to mod this on because you will have to have the other mod be a level 3, which cannot naturally roll on a rare, and so you're going to have to put on manually. Next, these 2 are phenomenal. Now, I happen to have currently these on the same piece of loot, so one rolled, one modified, but because they are Tier 2, they can naturally roll on any epic piece of gear naturally. So, these are your survival mods. Emergency Stance, again, when you drop below 30% for 4 seconds, you're going to have the Golem effect, and that's going to give you that, I believe it's 60 or 65% damage mitigation for that period. And Ice Trap, also, when you hit 30% or less life, you're going to do a 10-meter range AoE freeze. These are kind of both, oh shit buttons, and they can technically proc at the same time to really get you out of a bad spot. And the cooldown is not bad for either of them. Ice Trap is 5 seconds, so it's going to be almost always up, and Golem 10 seconds. Next, we can look at Stand Tall and Radical Therapy. Radical Therapy is big because you're going to be doing toxic damage with your Blight Turret, which is, again, anything that isn't one-shot by you is going to be probably affected by the Blight Turret. a flat 15% more damage against enemies affected by toxic is huge, because everything, every type of damage you do is going to be multiplied by this. So your gun damage, your turret damage, your mod damage, everything. The other one that's also very nice and easy, I like Stand Tall, mainly because it has firepower, which is fine, but it has an easily obtainable anomaly power. At max level 9,000, anomaly power is nothing to sneeze at, and you're going to be out of cover almost always, so this is going to be up almost always. Now, this anomaly build is meant to be not reliant on kill shots, or critical shots, because it's meant to be also friendly for group play. And since you're only shooting one bullet at a time, you're not having as many opportunities to crit. So you want mods that are going to just be very easy to apply, so their uptime is maximized. So Stand Tall is not bad. Next, we have Untamed Power here. And again, this is a must for the build. The sooner you get it on your gear, if you get a natural roll for it, do not disenchant or break down that piece of loot until you get a replacement. I've only ever found one properly rolled set of boots with this, and meaning having anomaly power, status power, and then cooldown power or skill life leech. So because you need this to be rolled naturally, it's a harder ratio to get, and this is actually a big part of your build, because you're going to be constantly spamming abilities, dropping turrets, etc. You're going to be proccing this AoE. It's going to go AoE damage. It's going to kill all the weak mobs around you. It's going to act as ways of kind of AoE healing on demand as well. So very powerful. Rejuvenation, as mentioned before in the guide, huge. Again, firepower, it gives you a little extra damage to your gun. That's not your primary damage, but it's not bad. But what I like here, it gives you some anomaly power and some armor. You're not going to be stacking too many armor buffs here. So to stay survivable, this extra armor, low noted here, could, as much as double your natural armor. And that makes a significant amount of difference. And again, it's going to be up for every 8 out of 10 seconds, because you're going to be constantly healing through your damage. So this is a nice, safe mod. All right, special mention for Aura Force. If you're in group play, Aura Force can be tempting. It is a massive boost to anomaly power. Level 50, it's over 30,000. That is no joke. The only problem with it, or the main problem, is it procs on a kill shot with a crit. Again, one-shot variant rifles, you have, even though they're accurate, and if you're fighting against humans, you can relatively effectively crit shot the enemies. But if you're fighting monsters, they have very weird hitboxes. It's not always like the head. It's weird prices of the face, etc. So I find that it's not nearly as consistent to get crit shots, and more specifically, crit shots to be kill shots. If this was kill shot only or crit shot only, I would feel more enticed to do this and pick this up. Now, if you're solo, I do not pick this up. If you're consistently playing in a group and other players are doing anomaly builds, so like an Anomaly Pyromancer or Devastator, those are the two ones that you see doing anomaly builds more often, then this may be worth a consideration. But for reference, I do not currently use this mod in my build. Now, early in your CT progression, if you're struggling and you don't have the other defensive mods I've mentioned so far, Damage Absorber is not bad because it's passive, it's always on, increases your armor by a decent amount, and increases your resistance. So resistance, again, more likely to not get impacted by harmful effects like, toxic and burn, etc. So it doesn't hurt. But again, it's just a nice passive armor buff if you have nothing else. Freezing Boost is another option for Tier 2. So boost your damage against enemies afflicted by freeze by 15%. Similar to the Toxic variant, the only difference is Toxic stays up on enemies much more than Frozen, because, again, Frozen is a CC. You don't have it up as often or as long. So the uptime for the benefit of this 15% when you really calculate it in actual play is quite a bit less than the toxic. So keep that in mind. As you get your cooldown lower and you start freezing things more and more, this will become a better and better value. Now, bullet kindling is another potential variable. As soon as you get the rifle, with the mod I'm going to be talking about for your endgame build, every time you shoot something, after when you reload, you're going to apply burn to it. And if you shoot multiple enemies that stay alive, every time you reload, it's going to reapply burn. So it is very realistic that you're going to have burn on enemies consistently once you get the right rifle mod, in which case this extra 20% burn becomes just as reliable as your toxic mod, for example. So don't sleep on this if it pops up. Okay, Move Groove is also an excellent option that you can throw in. Moving increases your anomaly power and firepower. Again, you mainly are getting it for anomaly power. There's not that many mods that just give you anomaly power. They seem to be these hybrids, which kind of makes sense based on how the game really leverages firepower. But you mainly do need as many sources of anomaly power if you can get it. Now, it may not be as powerful as the flat 20% damage boosts, but there are many times that I've had this on my build. And again, you can be looking down the sight. As long as you're kind of slowly moving, this will proc. Just remember, the second you stop, it's going to, and if you're just standing still while you're aiming, it's going to disable this. So if you're somebody that is just not trained to kind of strafe while you're sniping with your rifles, this may not be as good for you. Okay, now let's take a look at weapon mods. Now, as mentioned before, when it comes to weapon mods, you will, for endgame, need to make sure that your tier 2 mod is effectively rolled naturally. So, because your tier 3 mod, which for this build will be Scrap Grenade, once you can get it, you're going to have to manually put it on. The weapon that comes with Scrap Grenade is not viable for this build, in my opinion, or just highly annoying to use. So you need to get that second mod naturally so that you're able to put it on manually. Now, Mark of the Stake is what I prefer, mainly because it gets another dot on the enemies. Your damage over time effects are going to be quite effective. So I like this a lot. You don't have to use this, but remember, the majority of our damage is not your rifle damage. It's mainly going to be the mod damage from Scrap Grenade, which is not impacted by firepower or anything like that. And so the other mods that will, that you would traditionally use to increase the effectiveness of your actual gun don't apply here. So you want additional effects that work off Anomaly. So Mark of the Stake, I find, is the best one to choose if you can get it. Now, early on, before I min-maxed this build, I still had some gear that had firepower. And again, because you noticed the armor mods I recommended a moment ago, a lot of them still had firepower. Before I got an optimized rifle, I still used Anomaly Enhancement. So receives a passive firepower boost equal to 30% of your Anomaly power. Because I was getting Anomaly as a primary stat for all my gear and had those other mods that would constantly proc or provide me with high Anomaly, this 30% of that ended up being a significant boost to firepower. So it created almost like a hybrid environment for all intents and purposes. So this is a good gap stop for CT1 to CT10 if you get it as a naturally rolled tier 2. Now, another really good tier 2 mod, and arguably the best and probably most overpowered tier 2 mod, is going to be Bone Shrapnel. In fact, if you take a look, this actually competes with damage with Scrap Grenade, which is the tier 3 mod that we use. Now, for this, again, level 50, if you take a look, when you kill shot an enemy, it's going to cause an AoE damage, in this case, over 200k damage, and it inflicts bleed. Now, the downside to this is notice that this is kill shots, while Scrap Grenade is first shot after reloading. So this element is where if you are trying to make a group-friendly build that doesn't rely on kill shots, well, then you don't want to have bone shrapnel. Now, if you're playing solo and you're going to be kill shotting everything anyway, then you can get bone shrapnel instead of Mark the Stake, because Mark the Stake applies bleed, which is nice. This AoE, burn, this applies bleed, which also stacks of anomaly damage. So if you happen to get a naturally rolled bone shrapnel, hold on to it, and then you can add scrap grenade on top of it and get that double AoE. So this can, in theory, if you can kill shot consistently, do even more damage than Mark of the Stake. But again, the build that I linked to you earlier, the MAD Alchemist, is specifically not around kill shots, and it's meant to be as group friendly as possible. So keep that in mind. Okay, an alternative to Mark of the Stake is also Vortex Chamber. So here, reloading weapon inflicts slow on enemies previously wounded by this weapon without changing it. So this is better for survival. Again, notice the wording here. So let's say you shoot something and you don't kill it. You reload, it auto-applies slow. You shoot something else, it auto-reloads because it's a one-shot rifle. Now, if they are both alive, they're going to both be slowed unless they're immune to CC. In theory, if you're fighting like 3 or 4 monsters using a one-shot variant rifle and you're hitting them all, like rotating them, every time you reload, it will attempt to reapply slow to all of those marked targets. And as long as they haven't hit their crowd control immunity state, you're going to constantly reload them. Now, it's not going to help you with DPS. This is why I like the DPS mods better for this, but it can help with crowd control, meaning in group play. This can be very helpful when you're not the primary damage dealer, or if you're struggling to survive. This can also be very, very good. The final potential recommendation is Snow Squall. Just like with Mark of the Stake and the previously mentioned Vortex Chamber, this one, reloading weapon inflicts freeze on enemies previously wounded by this weapon without changing it. Again, great for CC. If you have, with this build at higher levels, you're going to have that bonus to frozen damage. So this is going to effectively increase the damage you do overall and your party can do. But again, just like with any crowd control mechanisms, you're going to hit that invulnerability state pretty quickly, especially against elites. So this is not going to be up on the mobs that you need it most on as much. Therefore, I don't rate it as high as the DPS options. But again, if in a group play, for example, you're not the primary damage dealer, you're being more of a support, this can help tremendously as well and can be very viable. Okay, now the most difficult and frustrating transition for people in this game I have found is going from that end of first tier of end game, so C tier 9 or 10 range, and then jumping over to CT11. CT11 through 13 that we're about to go into now, the enemies start getting harder and harder, and it's going to require more advanced tactics to min-max your gear. And I'm going to talk about that with you right now. The biggest difference is that Tiago is going to be playing a more pivotal role in your experience, because now every time you complete an expedition on the gold, you're going to be going from like 500 to 1,000 drop pods, and then it's going to be a couple of thousand. Eventually, it's going to be about 8,000, I think. CT12 potentially. At CT15, it's like 74,000 for a gold clear. Obviously, it goes up exponentially. But as soon as you are getting around that 500 to 1,000 of the drop pods per run, drop pods become a very, very important currency. Now, you're going to be utilizing that currency in 2 ways, and you need to avoid one trap strategy of ineffectively utilizing drop pods during CT11 to CT13. And I'm going to go over that right now. Now, when you first go to Tiago, you're going to notice that he's going to have a set of legendaries that do not change. Now, as a anomaly-based Technomancer, you're going to be interested in 2 pieces of loot from there and 2 pieces only. And I'm going to show you which ones they are. The first one is going to be a chest piece. unless you got lucky and got it randomly. And it's the Robe of the Borealis Monarch. Now, I actually wore this initially, even though it had firepower, because I cared about the Icicle Storm and I didn't have anything better, and I like the status power. But eventually you're going to break this down. So this is actually my second piece. I actually broke this down to get the mod, and I have the Icicle Storm in my other piece of loot here, and this is a perfectly rolled piece of gear for endgame that has 2 mods that are useful and really, really good stats. But you're going to pick this up as soon as you can because that Icicle Storm mod. The other weapon is going to be, I forget the name of the weapon right now, but what you care about is that it has the Scrap Grenade mod on there, the tier 3 one. You're going to buy it. You're probably not going to use it. You're going to break it down, and you're going to put it into whatever rifle you have. As soon as you have that, your end game mode is activated because you now can effectively use it, and you can effectively combo it either with Mark of the Stake or any of the mods that I mentioned in the CT1 to CT10 video under weapon mods. So if you skipped over that, go back to it using the timestamps, and I will tell you all the options that I find viable as naturally rolled for the rifles for endgame. And again, do note, because you are going to have to manually put on scrap mod onto your top end weapon, that means you will not get to choose that tier 2 one. So when you're looking for gear, you're going to need to find Mark of the Stake or one of the other viables innately on it. Now, drop pods are going to play, as I mentioned, a big role. And at first, when you start challenge tiers, they're going to be so precious, so rare, that you're going to be saving them up to get those 2 legendary items as soon as you can. Afterwards, they start playing a completely different role. So in theory, let me show you, let me start with what you do not want to do. When you go to Tiago, notice that he has a bunch of epic loot here, and it's random, refreshes. This refreshes every hour, unlike the normal vendors, which are 30 minutes. But there's nothing innately special about them. They're just epic. But they cost a ton of resources. If you take a look, they're roughly half the price of a legendary. So level 50, they're 42,000 resources. So unless you're like me and you're max level and you're continuously like capping out, like I have almost 1 million drop pods, then you could potentially buy something if you find the right mods. But normally do not do that. Instead, do the following. So as soon as you've got your 2 legendaries, you're now going to be able to transition. Whenever you finish an expedition, you can get an almost unlimited amount of titanium for crafting and the other basic scraps. And this is the most efficient way of getting those scraps. Better than any other strategy anybody's going to mention to you. And I don't see this mentioned nearly as much. So I'm going to tell you this in here. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to sell. And you're actually going to sell drop pods. And for example, once you get between CT 11 and 13, it's not uncommon to be getting 1,000 plus drop pods per run. So let's see, how much can we sell 1,000 drop pods for? So remember, this may be one run. 1,000 drop pods give you 78,000 money. So this may be a whole run potentially, or later on it could be 1/8 of a run. And so I'm selling it here because you get so little scraps from actually just playing and getting naturally dropped. Normally, the previous strategy was selling blues, but even selling 10 blues may get you 50,000 scraps. And people always say, oh, I don't have enough titanium. That's why I don't craft. Well, here, you can basically sell off as much as you want of your drop pods because you're really not going to need them again till super high end. The Eye of the kind of the Storm level tier 15 mission costs like 40,000, but by the time you get to it, that's going to be a drop in the bucket. So again, here there is a cap of 999,999 scrap. So I just sold off, a couple 100,000 of these drop pods, and I have almost max money. And now you can turn around. Now you can't do it here, which again, it's an annoyance for me that you have to go to Bailey because apparently he doesn't sell the materials. But now, I'm not low on any of them, but if you were low on leather or iron or titanium, buy it here. Best ratio. Once you get to that level, to save time, I no longer sell blues. I basically break down all blues and epics for the low components for modifying the stats on your gear. I only get resources via selling the drop pods effectively. So again, once you hit CT11 plus, this is the best way to get those resources. Now, there's a reason why CT11 to CT13 is the hardest part of this game. It's the biggest grind, and that's because for every single tier you go up, the enemies get much tougher, and your reliance on optimized gear becomes more and more important. And so the biggest change that piggybacks off of the resource management tips that I just went over is going to be your heavy reliance on crafting to optimize your gear. Depending on what build you're using, and if you're struggling to play and beat and progress, you're going to have to spend more proportionally time crafting. And there are a couple things you're going to be doing here. The first thing you're going to be doing potentially is raising the rarity of a piece of loot. Now, because your reliance on crafting and upgrading becomes so much more between CT11 and CT13, I wanted to go over the key things you're going to be doing with a piece of loot. So, as you find loot in the game, as low level as green loot, you're going to be looking at your stats. So in this case, it's kind of hard for me to get green loot because it never drops anymore. But in this case, this has Anomaly power, which is min-maxed for my Anomaly build. Cooldown reduction is also one of the viable options. Close range gem does not, but let's imagine this was status power, for example. So I see this and say, wow, this has potential. So in theory, finding a min-maxed green piece of loot is amazing because it has the most opportunity for you to find the correct mods, and I'll explain why. So when you go here and improve rarity, it doesn't cost much. I mean, it costs a couple thousand, of these leather mats. But notice in the bottom left corner, it says, choose one of 3 available options. Now, they're always going to be tier 1, and they're going to be likely be these mods that are specific to your builds. So in this case, unless your build requires a tier 1 mod, this is not going to be a big deal for you. But for me, for example, I have that turret mod, cryo turret mod that utilizes my status power. So if that was one of these options, that'd be awesome. And I would pick it. Here it doesn't matter because none of these work, but it's okay because this can still be the mod slot that is likely to be re-rolled, almost guaranteed. So I'm just going to pick this. And now we're going to improve it again to epic. Now, early game, people don't like doing this because it costs titanium, 617 at level 50. Again, it doesn't get more than this. This is nothing at high end CT11 because, again, if you use the tips and the following the link just right before this part of the video, I went over how drop pods can be sold effectively to get a ton of almost an unlimited amount of titanium. So we're going to spend this. Notice I have 12,000, so I'm not going to run out. And now this is the do or die moment. This piece of loot that if theoretically has min-max stats, it doesn't necessarily matter what this first one is, but what the second one is will make or break the piece of loot. So we look at this and we say power from ashes, not applicable for my build. Hidden med kit, not useful for me. Buckshot shell. At this point, it doesn't matter what I pick. This officially, unfortunately, is wasted and it's going to get disenchanted because it does not, the tier 2 is not something for my build, and unfortunately, tier 1 is not for it either. If at least the tier 1 was viable, then we could have replaced the second one. But otherwise, this is the RNG part. Still, the fact that you have more control over these elements is going to give you more opportunities, and it's going to help you get your perfect rolls much, much quicker. Now, let's take a look at the 2 other things that you can do. Number 1, since the early game, you already know about modifying mods. Again, you're only going to be modifying one, so let's theoretically say mod 2 was good, which is not. Then we can go to the first spot and say, okay, for my build, I know I'm going to want euthanizer. So I select that, left click, costs almost nothing, apply it, boom. Now magically, you have your min-maxed end tier loot, you're good to go. Even if you get this at level 46 or 47 or 44, well, you're going to, this is, you can click here. Obviously, this is maxed out, but this is going to cost you titanium and drop pods. So up to level 43, it's only titanium. Above 43, it's going to be titanium and drop pods. Again, initially you're going to be like, oh my God, drop pods. Eventually you're going to have more drop pods than anything else innately. So this will not be a big deal later on, especially once you're CT12 and CT13. So keep that in mind. Now, final thing when it comes to crafting, this is for super min-maxing. Now, what's a little annoying is unless this is a bug, if you go and raise attributes, okay, this is expensive. 150 is a lot because you need to use 150 per slot to max this out, for example. But let's say this was level 49 gear. Let's say I maxed all of this out and spent thousands of these little resources, these shards. The second I leveled this up to 50, this all gets re-rolled. And from my understanding, this gets fully reset. So if that is true and that doesn't get fixed, then you never want to, unless you're super desperate and you're specifically raising just anomaly power because that scales with this build the most, you do not want to invest in this until your top end. Now, if you mouse over your shards here under resources, it'll tell you how much you have of each of them. So notice I have a ton of them except for cooldown reduction. This is why in my main build, I am non-min-max on cooldown reduction. Now, how do you get these? Well, you've been getting these without realizing it the entire game. If you mouse over any part of loot or look at any part of loot, when you see these little shard icons here, this means when you break down this item, you're going to be getting anomaly power shards, cooldown shards, etc. This is why, as I mentioned, the second reason earlier in levels, you always break down epics. And later on, when you can rely on your drop pods for getting resources, you can start doing to all the blues. Now, what's important is that epics, as you see here, are more likely to have all three of them be marked as shards, but it's not guaranteed. My gloves, for example, notice only the anomaly power is marked. So if you break this down, I'm not going to get cooldown reduction resources back. If you look at legendaries, again, keep in mind which ones are going to break down. Now, what I believe is once you invest those shards in there, they will return the shards when you break them down. Now, I haven't calculated if it is all of them. I do know that you get some back. If somebody does some research on it, do put a comment below whether you get all of them back. If you get them all back, that's phenomenal, and then you can invest early. But I was always safe, and as I leveled up, the only thing I would level up before level 50 is my primary stat. In this case was anomaly power to scale my skill abilities more. But as you approach higher level, that's the other way to level up. So you're going to be leveling up level, rarity, how I explained, and then finally shards. And yes, this is something you're going to start doing between CT11 to 13 if you're struggling. Don't overlook this. If you're following the build and you have item levels of appropriate level, you should be able to clear this content no problem. But I find out most people mess up in this section. Now I want to very quickly mention the skills and skill tree for a CT11 to 13. If you're not just jumping into this, it's going to be the same as CT1 to 10. But if you are using the timestamps, note you're going to be using Blighted Turret, you're going to be using Cold Snap, you're going to be using Cryo Turret. And to this point, until you get your legendary rifle and your main rifle drop, which likely is going to happen during this period, this is the build you're going to be using still. So notice we are going up here to Sniper Master, mainly for the 20% increased drop chance to sniper weapons. Again, you may actually have to wait, depending on your RNG, you may not find your legendary weapon until you're about to hit level 14. And if you want to see what that skill setup is going to be for ultimate endgame, check out the timestamp for skills and ability and skill trees for tier 14 and 15, because there's a chance if you get lucky with your weapons, you may want to transition to that build early. In that case, again, check out that timestamp below to look ahead to that. Okay, you finally cleared CT13 at a high level, and you have unlocked CT14. Congratulations, you've gotten over the most difficult hump in the game. This is going to change the game dramatically for you in two different ways. Number one, because you can do tier 14 now, it allows you to craft level 49 gear. This is important because before you really try and push to clear CT14 in gold, and do note that in order to unlock CT15, you have to get a gold time on CT14. Earlier on, you could always bump up by one level by getting a silver, or 2 levels or 2 tiers by going gold. So that was a nice cheap way to bump up even if you're not super performing. But now you have to get that gold. So the biggest mistake you can do is going into this with level 48 gear and trying to do level 49. It's super inefficient. Now, this means that when you get into the CT14 and 15 category, at first, what you're going to be running is a bunch of CT13 runs. I'll explain why. At this point, legendary drops become way more consistent. And I want to explain how this scales. So if we go back to C tier 10, where a lot of people get stuck, at the end of a run, if you get a gold drop, you're going to get all your normal loot, and you're going to get 4 guaranteed loots. Now, of those 4 loots, you have a 9% to get a rare, 85% chance of getting an epic, 6% of legendary. So you can get a legendary, but it's very, very unlikely. You'll notice that, as low as tier 8, 2.5%, tier 7, 1.5. I mean, you're just not going to get legendaries. But even at tier 10, it's only 6%. But look what happens here. It doesn't scale linearly anymore. 7.5 is okay at tier 11. 12 is 10. But look at this big jump from tier 12 to tier 13. You're now at 15%. This is significant. These 4 bonus items, you are not going to get any blues. You're going to more likely get epics. But now you have a 15% chance of getting a loot. That means every time you do this run, it's 4 times 15% chance of getting loot. Now, it doesn't quite work like, oh, okay, you add that up and you technically have a 60% chance. No, it's just like rolling a D10 die. You have 4 times chance of getting a legendary. But this does mean that happens quite a bit. A 15% chance is significant, and you're going to start getting legendaries. Now, notice it bumps up again to 20 at tier 4, but getting a gold at tier 14 is huge. But if you fail, that drops all the way down to 10%. So for farming, honestly, you're way more likely to get a gold tier 13 at 50% than a silver even of tier 14. And if you were to get a bronze, for example, it's only 5%, which is junk. So this is why the biggest tip people will give you is you're going to want to farm CT13 a lot and get really fast at it, where you're easily getting gold without stressing, so you can just kind of almost autopilot farm this to get your legendaries. So that is the first big change once you unlock CT14. Now, the second big change, obviously, here is going to be your ability to get legendaries, which in turn is going to give you access to tier 3 mods. Now, again, I do want to reemphasize before we look at tier 3 mods, the very first thing you should be doing is getting all your optimized gear to level 49. That jump from level 48 to 49 gear that you can now craft is not only going to make your stats much better, but remember, the enemies you're going to be facing are going to be 48 on CT13. You having item level 49 is going to give you a significant statistical advantage, and it's going to make those CT13 farms all the much easier. Okay, now the second big change is the first time in the game where you're going to consistently be getting a lot of legendaries, and you're going to start unlocking more and more legendary mods. Now, it's going to create situations like this. I have a Cranium of Lost Creatures, which is one of the best possible items, legendary items for my build, because it has anomaly power, cooldown reduction, skill life leech, all very, very good. And getting a legendary item with a mod, a tier 3 mod that is appropriate for your build, is the only way to get the coveted double 3 tier 3 mod selection like I have here. So notice, power simulation is amazing for anomaly builds. It's the best mod in the game for it, because boost your anomaly power by 11,000 on level 50 for each elite present on the battlefield. In the high-end expeditions, it's not unusual to have 2, maybe even sometimes 3 elites And this is automatic. It doesn't have to proc by any other means. So as long as they're out there, you're getting between 11,000 and maybe even 33,000 anomaly damage. Huge and powerful. And again, if there's no elites, you don't have this, but then again, everything's dying so fast, that's not elite, so it doesn't matter. So this is a must-have for the build. And it also, again, gives you an opportunity to get, for example, Euthanizer. Here's one example that's key to my build. And so this is kind of like the meta setup, if you can. For all of your epic custom gear, like this chest piece, again, you're going to have one of your required tier 1 or tier 2 mods that need to naturally roll. And then you're going to mod in your tier 3 and or potentially tier 2s if they're kind of best in slot. Now let's take a look at first at the armor mods that you're going to be emphasizing that are tier 3. You're definitely going to be focusing on these here at CT14 and 15. And if you're lucky, you may get access to these early in the game as well. Now, in particular, for an anomaly build, there's a couple that I have unlocked so far that are very, very critical that I'm going to emphasize here. The first one that I don't currently utilize, but is very, very helpful, if you can get it, is Anomaly Echo. Now, grants 3,000, in this case, firepower, and over 11,000 anomaly power bonus on skill activation for 15 seconds. I wish this stacked, because then this would be amazing. But because we're constantly spamming abilities every couple of seconds, this will be up 24/7, and it's one way to get reliable anomaly damage or anomaly stat, power stat on your gear. Next is the aforementioned Euthanizer, another critical one. Everything is going to, at least your elite mobs are going to be marked by your Blight turret. So this is just a flat 25% damage. It's absolutely huge. For survival, life of the party is kind of a special mention. It's good if you're getting swarmed. I had it on my gear for a while. This used to be 5% per stack, and so this used to stack to 25 or 40%, which was much better. It's nerfed now. If you don't have some of the other survival tiers and you find that you're getting swarmed and dying, this is decent. But again, unfortunately, after the nerf, it's not quite as good. Not Impressed is another amazing mod. I don't currently use it, but in a lot of builds, it's very, very useful if you're dying a lot. Reduces the damage taken from elites by 25%. Majority of the times you die, it's to elite damage. So this is going to help you tremendously. Okay, and then when it comes to, for this build, actual class-specific tier 3 mods, the one that I find useful, and the only one I find useful, is going to be Icicle Storm. It's off the legendary armor piece, Borealis Monarch chest piece, and it's Cold Snap, killing enemies frozen by the skill, makes them explode, dealing at level 50, 252,000 damage in 5-meter radius. This is going to, if you've seen my video for my MAD Alchemist build, you're just going to AoE proc. It's going to clear whole areas. When you have a bunch of scrubs that are around an elite, they all blow up, all chain, and do millions and millions of damage to elite, sometimes killing it. It's a must-have as soon as possible on your build. It will change your build forever. Absolutely mandatory. And there is one more mod that I have found that is tremendously powerful for the Anomaly build. And I say found loosely because I actually haven't found it. I'm still farming it, but I'm going to pop up a picture of it. And it is Captain Hunter. It increases your damage against elites by 25%. So this is absolutely huge. And it's because elites is the main thing you're going to do damage against. It's very, very powerful. In addition, there is also a build similar to Euthanizer. Again, it comes off a legendary armor piece, Borealis Monarch leg piece, if I'm not mistaken. And it's going to, similar to the Toxic Euthanizer, going to give you 25% damage against frozen targets. Again, I have not gotten this yet. I am still farming for it. If you can get that, for this Anomaly build, this is huge because it does impact all Anomaly damage, as well as your weapon damage, your mod damage, etc. Very, very powerful. So for an Anomaly build, there's way fewer options because you're not focusing on all the firepower mods as other builds do. But also, it makes it a much clearer pathway to getting the loot you need. So make sure you take a look at that. Back in the earlier videos, take a look at the lower tier videos on armor mods. I discussed all the tier 2 mods for both weapons and armor. Those are also important, but because they are the same, I'm not going to repeat them there. So I hope that helps you with your mod search. Okay, and finally, we're going to look at the CT14 and 15 changes to your skills and skill trees. Now, skills, it's not changing again. Same Blighted Turret, Cold Snap, and Cryo Turret combo. But what we do see here is a change to your final final end game layout for your skill tree. Now, as referenced earlier in my video, if you get your legendary weapon dropped and your min-maxed epic rifle or close enough, you may swap to this early. So before we were going up here to Sniper Master to mainly to get that 20% increased chance of sniper weapons, but now you should in theory have the gear you need for weapons, and we can swap over to this min-max option. Now, a couple key things here. It's for the most part a tech shaman build, but there's a couple important things. We most definitely make sure to get both of the marked execution nodes. Even though vulnerability got nerfed, with both of these, you're still getting 27% damage increase from all sources. It's huge and applies when you do toxic damage or apply the toxic effect, as well as you freeze enemies. Very, very powerful. Also, unique to this heavy anomaly build, you're going to make sure you get wipeout here, 20% damage to enemies below 30% health. This is huge. Anytime you have flat percent damage, it's way more powerful than like 20% or more anomaly or firepower. It just scales differently. It's phenomenal. And then, of course, you want adrenalized antenna. You're going to be spamming your toxic turret, so your blight turret. So you're going to be getting this 30% to anomaly damage to yourself and your party. If you're running with other anomaly build players, this is even more useful, like an anomaly-based Pyromancer or Devastator. You're going to get way more mileage. Obviously, if you have another Technomancer that's a Pestilence build, not so useful, but still helps out. And then the other big thing here you're going to note is that we do, even though in a perfect world I'd love to get medical unit, a lot of people get this, extra 30% healing. The fact is we don't have enough points for this. We would either be losing the extra damage from one of the marked for executions, or we couldn't get adrenalizing antenna. Both of these I find are more helpful than this element. So again, those are the things you have to sacrifice. We are maximizing the damage from freeze, as you see here, and also freeze affected on enemies last 20% longer. Some people are like, oh, 20 extra percent armor. That some people may like that better for survival, but you're not going to have trouble surviving once you get the right mods, and you're going to be self-healing for a ridiculous amount of damage. So having that freeze last as long as possible. Again, this is going to stack with the stats that you're going to pick up. In fact, just to emphasize here, if you look at your stat sheet, look at status power. So this has an increase to the duration of freezes, as well as Ash, vulnerable, and weakness, because you're stacking status power and then multiplying that by 1.2 again. You're just able to have things frozen for a very, very long time. Non-elites, if they don't die instantly, will freeze for 5-6 seconds sometimes, I found, at higher level when you have min-max stats. And even elites stay frozen for a while. So for survival and crowd control, so powerful. So that 20% is helpful. All right, guys, so that's everything you need to know for getting through CT14 and 15. If you follow and get all the gear and the mods I mentioned here, you are going to have no problem clearing CT15 on gold. If you haven't checked it out, check out my full build guide for my unique Technomancer Anomaly build. It is the MAD Alchemist, and you're going to see footage with this exact gear I'm talking about, clearing a CT15 that has a gold requirement timer of almost 16 minutes. I cleared it in about 11 minutes and 30 seconds solo with this build. 0 chances of dying, super safe. So again, it shows you how you can play with that build at the highest level, and it can compete in many ways with the firepower builds, but the big difference is your survivability is so much higher. You don't have to be a glass cannon. And did I mention, it's just a lot more fun to play, in my opinion, much more interactive. It's not just shoot the gun and have your bullets blow everything up immediately. So we have that option as well. You can check out my other video for leveling up the more meta firepower based build. But hopefully this video helps you out if you are on my team and want to try out an anomaly based Technomancer. Okay, guys, hope you enjoyed this video. Again, if you watched all the way through or a big portion of this, maybe you're the type of person that loves my content, the in-depth content that will go above and beyond basic guides. If you like that, not only hit that like for me, but subscribe. Maybe hit that notification bell. I cover looter shooters and RPGs on this channel. So if you love those two things, this is the channel for you. Again, this is Leeroy of Leeroy Gaming, and I'm going to see you guys in the next video.